All right. I am very excited to have our next guest on. We got him on for the whole hour. He's the author of a couple of books, The Smarter Science of Slim, The Calorie Myth. He is a computer programmer and has registered more than 25 patents, serves as a senior program manager for Microsoft. He also runs a wellness consulting business. He's from Washington, and is the author of a great new book called The Calorie Myth. Welcome to the bright side, Jonathan Bailor. How you doing, buddy?
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. It's awesome to be on your show.
And it's good to have you. I'm so excited because we talk, as I said to you before we went on the air, we talk about the calorie myth all the time. And I'm really excited to have you share your take on it. You certainly don't mean that calories are mythological, but what is that? What exactly is the calorie myth?
You're spot on. This is not one of those books that says the calories don't count. Calories certainly count. The calorie myth is that you need to count them. What I mean by that is, prior to the obesity epidemic, nobody knew what a calorie was, let alone count them. And we didn't have an obesity epidemic. So common sense seems to dictate that the solution to the obesity epidemic isn't more precise metabolic math. Maybe we should look back and see what we did before we had this problem and do that instead.
So where did this thing come from? Where did the idea that calories and weight and losing calories means losing weight, and all you got to do to lose weight is drop your calories, which everybody knows isn't true, because people lose calories, or people restrict their calories all the time and don't lose weight. That's one of the most common complaints that I get. Probably you hear all the time. I'm eating less food and I'm not losing weight. Where did this whole idea come from?
It's extremely intuitive. I like to think of the calorie myth, or this idea that if you just eat less, you will sustainably lose weight, as being analogous to the flat earth theory. Because if you look out your window, and if your listeners look out their window, it really looks like the earth is flat. It's very intuitive that the earth is flat, and if it wasn't flat, wouldn't the people on the bottom fall off? It makes sense from an observational perspective. But then once we dig into the actual science and we start to understand scientific laws, such as the law of gravity, we understand that the Earth doesn't have to be flat. And in fact, now we think it's ridiculous to think that the Earth is flat. Similarly, if you just look at weight on the surface, it seems to make sense intuitively that if you just eat less and exercise more, you'll lose weight. It's intuitive. And in fact, there's very popular shows on television that seem to support that mythology. But once you start to understand science, especially modern science versus the theories of 50 years ago, you start to see that the body is, as you've said, it's a dynamic system, and it doesn't want to starve to death. And if you start to try to starve it, it's going to counteract your
compensate.
So exactly. So instead of trying to fight your body through starvation, which is horribly unhealthy, instead we need to facilitate your body to heal itself, as you talk about so well on your show.
Now, what about density? What about nutritional density as opposed to just calories? Where does that fit in?
It's hugely important. Calories in and of themselves are agnostic. They're not good or bad. If I were to say, here's 200 calories, is that good or bad? I mean, all things being equal, it's good, because if you ate no calories, you would die of starvation. But we have to look deeper. We have to say what comes along with those calories. This is the fundamental problem with the calorie mythology, is it ignores everything else. Everything else. In the calorie mythology, popular food manufacturers will have billboards saying that their soda isn't bad for you because it only contains 140 calories.
So a Twinkie's like 20 calories or 30 calories. That's good food based on this calorie counting concept.
Exactly, but we all know, especially from a pharmacological perspective, that calories, I mean, for example, heroin doesn't have any calories in it. That doesn't mean it's good for you.
Well, you lose weight on it, apparently. And so, no, I understand your point is well taken, but you know what, Jonathan, why don't we talk about what exactly a calorie is, and how once you define what a calorie is, talk about how the body processes that calorie.
The calorie is just a measure of energy. So certainly if you overfuel your body, if you consistently eat 10,000 calories of butter per day, you will gain fat. The good news is that nobody does that, and no one will do that. And it's analogous to saying, if you pour a kiddie pool full of water into your sink, will your sink overflow? Yes, it will. The good news is that no one pours an entire kiddie pool full of water into their sink. If you put water in a sink, It might rise temporarily, but it'll fall automatically. So calories are like water to our metabolic sink. They're something we need. They're what we are meant to eat. They're fuel for us. They're like gasoline for our car's fuel tank. But they're just a measure of the quantity of energy. That's it. They're a measure of one thing that you put into your body. There are hundreds of thousands of other things that come in along with those calories, but if all you think about is calories, you will ignore all of them, and you will end up in the big fat obesity and diabetes epidemic that we have today.
Do we have a shut-off point for calories? I mean, can the body read calories and then shut off appetite based on just the amount of calories that are coming in, or is the satiety or satisfaction centers, are they keyed more into nutrition or nutrients?
It's both. So, and this is what we dig into in detail in the Calorie Myth book, which is that you have this portion of your brain, called your hypothalamus, which is designed to maintain balance within your body. I mean, isn't it interesting that none of us count vitamin C in and vitamin C out, yet we don't get diseases from a deficiency in vitamin C as long as we eat normal food? I mean, isn't it amazing that our blood sugar seems to regulate itself, as does our blood pressure and our breathing and our
water
hydration
too.
levels?
Yeah, water.
Exactly. Isn't it amazing that if you drink more, you just go to the bathroom more? You don't have to think about it. It just happens.
So what happens with calories? How come with calories? How come there's not an automatic shut-off point with calories? That seems to be the one one aspect of food that's not controlled by satiety centers.
There absolutely is. There is absolutely an automatic shut-off mechanism. The best way to prove this is with humans, there is a lot of emotional aspects involved in eating. So when researchers really want to look at this objectively and scientifically, they look at animal models. So if you look at like a rat, for example, a rat doesn't emotionally eat, but its brain is quite similar to us from a genetic level.
Hang tight. We got to take a break. Jonathan. But I want do animals eat more when they're under stress? And don't answer now. I want to address that when we come back from our break. We're talking to Jonathan Bailor, author of The Calorie Myth, as well as The Smarter Science of Slim. I'm Pharmacist Ben. You're listening to The Bright Side on the Genesis Communication Network. We'll be back right after this. We are back on the bright side talking to Jonathan Bailor, author of The Calorie Myth, as well as The Smarter Science of Slim. Jonathan's website is caloriemythbook.com. Do you have another website, Jonathan?
I do, the smarterscienceofslim.com, but stick with caloriemythbook.com. It's going to be your best resource.
Caloriemythbook.com. Tons of YouTube videos I noticed up. You got a lot of YouTube videos up as well, a lot of radio interviews, lots of good information. Jonathan, before we went to break, you were talking about this whole emotional aspect of eating. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I would like you to continue, but then maybe talk a little bit about the idea that the animals eat emotionally as well.
The key thing to keep in mind is there is an automatic shut-off point. That's where we left off. In fact, in animal models, it was impossible for researchers to make animals gain weight prior to what they call the advent of the cafeteria diet, meaning researchers would literally pump calories into the stomachs of animals, and they wouldn't gain weight because the animals would just stop eating. So, but when they started to introduce animals to non-food, aka processed starches and sweets, or what we eat today, the animals effortlessly gained and maintained an elevated set point weight, what I refer to in my research. So there is absolutely an automatic shutoff. This automatic shutoff can be deranged, though, by stress caused by non-food, as well as other sources of stress, such as just naturally your boss is being a jerk, or you're not getting enough sleep, things like that.
Now, when you say shutoff point, you're talking about the satiety, the satisfaction center, correct?
That's exactly right. We've all experienced this, right? If you eat nutrient-dense proteins and vegetables, you can get full quite easily, whereas if you eat, for example, a potato chip that markets itself to saying once you pop, you can't stop, the more of them they eat, you could eat 600 calories without feeling satisfied at all.
If it's empty, in other words, if it doesn't have the density, the nutritional density.
Not only that, but if it also has appetite-stimulating things, such as what we've seen in starch and sugar, which actually stimulate your appetite, or with high-fructose corn syrup, that actually alters your baseline levels of hormones and makes you eat more calories long-term.
What do you think there's a nefarious conspiratorial aspect to this food processing idea?
I think it is incredibly similar to tobacco. And in fact, it is owned, Kraft, for example, is owned by Philip Morris. Many of our food, quote-unquote food companies are owned, and it's the same type of thing. There are proven addictive characteristics of certain foods, and it does not make sense for me as a food manufacturer from a profit perspective, forget about morality for a second, to sell you something that doesn't make me money and keeps you healthy and satisfied, because that eliminates my market.
Have you heard of the Monell Institute in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania?
What do they do?
This is a place where they study. They got it's all funded by by drug companies and food companies, and they got all these PhDs, brilliant minds, figuring out the actual nature of the molecular nature behind the molecular aspect behind eating behaviors, and how to exploit that molecular aspect by putting specific chemicals in food. A place called the Monell Institute, and there's a book called Taste, just called Taste, where the gal talks about this place, and that's why I asked you about if you think this is done intentionally, in terms of kind of in a conspiratorial sort of fashion. But you're saying it's more like an economic interest, more like capitalistic interests, as I understand. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do not think there is the CEO of a food company is sitting there pursing his fingers together, wondering how he can cause more people to become diabetic. Diabetic is just a consequence of him making his food products as delicious as possible and as appetite stimulating as possible. So, are cigarette manufacturers evil, or are they something else? Let's call it something else.
How about a cross between? How about a cross between? That's where I want to leave it.
There you go.
There's a book called Gulp. I don't know if you heard of this book called Gulp, and it's a gal talks about all the different aspects of food manufacturing and manipulating food for sale and for capitalistic and economic and mercenary interests. And she talks about dog food and how she says how they know a dog food is good if a dog will eat enough of it to throw up. And if the dog vomits, then they knew that the dog food was good. And sometimes I think that somehow relates to how we decide, how manufacturers decide whether a food for human consumption is a good food, whether people will eat so much of it that they feel like throwing up. And if they don't, then probably that's not a food that's going to be economically viable. But in any case, isn't that kind of interesting? The dog has to throw up for the dog food to be a good quality dog, for a good product. All right.
Well, and the one reason, just real quick, where I hedge my bets and don't call these people evil is if we believe these calorie myths that we've been fed, it's very easy for them to sleep at night thinking that if people just eat 1,600 calories, regardless of what it's from, that they'll be healthy and fit, because that is what we've been told. Mm-hmm. So until we can educate them, I believe they have a little bit of moral defense.
Well, there's actually something called a Twinkie diet. There was a food professor, I forgot where he was from, and he proved that you could lose weight by just eating Twinkies based on this idea.
And there's an amputation diet as well, which proves that you can lose weight by cutting off your right leg, but I wouldn't recommend it either.
Or by cutting off your head. That's also a good way to lose weight, apparently. All right, so tell us about SANE, this whole aspect. I love your little acronym, SANE, and how it relates to the whole calorie myth. A calorie is a calorie is a calorie.
The second of the 3 calorie myths I explore in the book is that a myth that the calorie is a calorie, which is like saying that water is water. So see that mud puddle over there in the gutter on the street? Just go drink that. It's fine. Right. So if you actually look at the research, there's 4 factors that prove clinically that a calorie is not a calorie, and they're abbreviated using the acronym SANE. SANE stands for satiety, or how quickly calories fill you up, how long they keep you full. Aggression, the hormonal and blood sugar impact of calories. Nutrition, how many essential vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and fatty acids come along with the calorie. And then efficiency, or how easily our body can store those calories as fat.
And those are all the factors that have to do with how quickly or how effectively a calorie will make you gain weight. Is that correct?
Or lose weight. Calories are just, nutrition is information. So there's literally studies showing that you can actually eat a diet consisting of more calories, but depending on their source, you will lose more weight than a diet with fewer calories.
All right, talk to us about protein. There's all this mythology out there about protein, as well as, in fact, I would say there's just as much mythology about protein as there is about calories, and misunderstandings as well. The way I look at it, though, protein intake is one of the best ways to lose weight, and one of the most nutritionally dense forms of caloric intake, at least in terms of biological value. What's your take on protein?
You're exactly right. The 3 things that consistently differentiate sane calories in food. What we want to eat more of from insane edible products are water, fiber, and protein. So protein, fiber, and water-rich foods are across the board better for us than dry, low-fiber, low-protein foods. And you're exactly right. There's a huge amount of mythology around protein. So just to get the facts straight, protein doesn't cause cancer. Protein is healthy long-term. Protein doesn't cause cardiovascular disease. Protein does help burn body fat, and we can provide studies supporting every single one of those statements.
Now, how you got to distinguish proteins, though, correct? There's protein and there's protein. They're not all the same, just like not all calories are the same. Tell us how you would distinguish the various types of protein.
You're exactly right. There's high and low quality everything. So it's not that carbs, protein, or fat are good or bad. We have to say, what are the high quality sane sources? So when it comes to protein, we want to get protein that is complete and very biologically available for our body. And again, doesn't have a bunch of garbage coming along with it. And these are going to be things found from humanely raised animals. So you don't want to eat sick animals. That would make you sick. As well as from wild caught seafood that is low in things like mercury and items like that. A lot of what we hear about as being a good source of protein, such as a bean or a nut, it is not at all a good source of protein. It doesn't mean it's bad for you. It's just mostly carbohydrate or fat.
We got to take a break, Jonathan, but I want to explore that idea of bean and nut protein because I got a lot of vegans out in the audience who really do focus on that type of protein. We're talking to Jonathan Bailor, author of The Calorie Myth. I'm Pharmacist Ben. You're listening to The Bright Side. We'll be back right after this. All right, welcome back to The Bright Side. I am Pharmacist Ben. Thanks for being here. We're here Monday through Friday, 8 to 9 Pacific and 10 to 11 Central Time, 24/7 on our archive page at brightsideben.com. We're talking to Jonathan Bailor, author of The Calorie Myth, as well as The Smarter Science of Slim. Welcome back, Jonathan. Before we went to break, you were talking about beans and legumes. We've got a lot of vegetarians who listen to this program. What's your take on vegetarian protein and the bean and legume thing? And I know you said it had a lot of carbohydrates, but aren't there a lot of anti-nutrients in legumes and beans as well?
There are, and even popping up to a much more mainstream, self-evident level. If we're going to call something a good source of protein, let's agree on what good source of protein means. So I would say there's two things. One is it's a complete protein, meaning it gives us everything that is beneficial about protein. And the second thing is that it has more protein in it than anything else. For example, if a kidney bean has 35% protein in it and 51% carbohydrate, if it's a good source of protein, then is it a very, very, very good source of carbohydrate? Because it has more carbohydrate than it has protein. Whereas if you look at like a tuna fish, for example, it's 94% protein. That seems like a good source of protein to me.
Do you think it's a lot harder for a vegetarian or a vegan to lose weight than it would be or is it easier for them to gain weight than it is for a carnivore?
I think it depends on where they're getting their calories. A carnivore who's eating hot dogs and Spam is not going to have a very easy time losing weight versus a vegetarian who is getting most of their calories from healthy fats versus maybe a vegetarian. Now, if a vegetarian is eating predominantly starches and sweets, then, of course, that's going to be very difficult to be healthy or fit. So I rather not say, vegetarian is good, the carnivore diet is good. I'd rather say that high-quality, nutrient-dense, sane plant and animal foods are the optimal choices.
All right, so as long as we're busting myths, calorie myths, and protein myths, let's move on to fats a little bit, because there's a lot of mythology around fats and misunderstandings around, as there is with everything in nutrition, it seems like, but especially when it comes to protein and calories and fats. Give us your take on fats, good fats, bad fats. Can you lose weight by using fats? And what about the whole idea that there's no insulin that's associated with fat absorption, and perhaps maybe even you could eat all the fat you want without gaining weight? And then I do want to talk about insulin a little bit.
It is absolutely a myth that you can eat all the fat you want and not gain weight. So two things that are really important. One, eating more natural fats instead of starches and sweets is the single most important shift we need to make as our culture. We should be using fat as our primary fuel source, natural fats, rather than processed starches and sweets. That said,
that's huge, though, Jonathan. That's a huge statement. We should be eating more natural fats, getting our energy from fats more than from other food groups. Is that correct, to lose weight?
It is, and it's not. You do not need to take my word for it. It is shocking, but go look, for example, the chair of the Department of Nutrition at the Harvard School of Public Health. He has published entire papers saying, like the title of the paper is dietary fat the cause of obesity? No. This is not controversial in actual academic circles. The highest of ranks, the Harvard Medical School, in the Journal of the American Medical Association says as much. It just hasn't permeated the mainstream.
Wow. Now, certainly, when we say fat, that's kind of a catch-all word. How do you distinguish fats? There's probably lots of ways to distinguish it, but how does Jonathan Bailor distinguish the various types of fats?
So you always want to start by saying, what are the fats found directly in nature? So I like to call the food group in question whole food fats. So an egg is a whole food that is predominantly fat. Nuts are a whole food that are predominantly fat. So I recommend eating whole food fats. So salmon, whole food that contains lots of fat. Grass-fed beef, whole food which contains some fat. You want to get your fats from whole food, natural fats.
Now, how about the idea of cooking and processing even in natural fat? What is like nut butters, for example? Any problems there?
You want to be careful because it's very easy to overeat fat if all you ate was fat. So you want to have a balance of fat, good carbohydrate, and good protein. Good carbohydrate are generally things like non-starchy vegetables, low fructose fruits. Good proteins are what we talked about, humanely raised animals, and good fats are these natural whole food fats. You need to eat all of those things to have a healthy, nutritious, life-sustaining diet. And I would recommend starting with non-starchy vegetables first, then moving on to your protein, and then following up with fats.
You're talking about in terms of a meal?
Exactly.
So you start off with non-starchy veggies, kind of get to the fiber to fill you up, I take it, and so you'll be eating less. Is that right?
There's three primary factors, or maybe 3.5, that influence satiety, and this has just been proven over and over and over in the research community, and that's the stretch that food places on your digestive system, and so you need fiber and water to do that.
Mechanically stretching the stomach, in other words.
Exactly. So you need to eat a certain volume of food, and that's why vegetables are so useful. And then protein and fat have hormonal impacts that trigger satiety centers in your brain. So eating a lot of vegetables, a good portion of protein, and then some whole food fats are going to make you feel full and satisfied without overeating. Whereas if your entire meal was butter, it would be very easy to overeat and undernourish yourself.
Do you make a distinction between essential and unsaturated fats versus saturated fats like butter and coconut oil?
I like to look at what comes along with the fat. So I focus less on ratios of fats and more on saying if you focus on foods that provide you with the most essential nutrients, you will get the correct ratio of fat. So, for example, focusing on macadamia nuts, salmon, cocoa, coconut, without having to do omega-3, omega-6 ratios and balances, focus on food first, the foods we've talked about here, and your fats will take care of themselves just like they did for every other person who ever lived prior to the current 3 generations.
How about salt? Does that fit into satiety at all?
Salt in terms of you salting your own food, it would be very difficult for you to take in, if you do not eat processed and packaged food, an amount of salt that would be bad for you. Salt only becomes a problem when you eat non-food because the amount of salt that these edible products contain in them is ridiculous. You would never put that much salt on food you prepared yourself.
So you're saying, now you said non-edible foods. How did you say that? That's kind of an interesting distinction.
Edible products. So things you, for example,
non-food edible products. So they're
exactly.
That's kind of cute. Non-food edible products. I like that's a huge statement right there. We've got a culture that subsists on non-food edible products. Is that right?
Or you can even shorten it and say edible products. And in fact, 40 to 60% of the average American's calories are coming from edible products, which are things that just didn't exist in the world up until recently.
So basically, if you're living on something that's edible but it's not food, you got some problems. Is that the idea?
And it also takes us down a really interesting rabbit hole that questions the entire definition of food, because you know what? Diet soda has no calories in it, but we still call it food. So what differentiates that from cough syrup or from aspirin? Like, they're all just chemicals that change your body, right?
Would you say that there's a huge proportion of what we eat couldn't even be considered food then? Like probably 50, 60, 70%. That would include hamburgers and fast food and that kind of thing, McDonald's hamburgers. Just because it's edible doesn't mean it's food, in other words.
Exactly. Cocaine is edible. Cigarette. I mean, you can inhale tobacco smoke. You can put nicotine into your body. That doesn't mean you should. And that is the cause of the obesity epidemic. The cause of the obesity epidemic is not gluttony and sloth. it's eating non-food that breaks your body, just like putting non-gasoline in your car would break your car.
That is an awesome statement. Thanks, Jonathan. Hey, hang tight. We got to take a break here, and then we'll finish up. We got one more segment. We're talking to Jonathan Bailor, fascinating guest. His book is The Calorie Myth. His website is the caloriemythbook.com. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to The Bright Side on the Genesis Communication Network. All right, we're back on The Bright Side. Got one more segment to talk to Jonathan Bailor. We busted the calorie myth. We busted some mythology about protein. We busted some mythology about fats. Let's see what we missed here, Jonathan. Carbohydrates. There's a guy who wrote a book called The Starch Solution, and he says that starch is the way to go if you want to lose weight. He literally says this in the book, The Starch Solution. He's a doctor, and he shall go unnamed. What's your take on carbs, carb restriction, reducing carbs, or high carb, low carb diets as far as it has to do with losing weight?
Carbs, protein, and fat, as we mentioned, are neither good nor bad intrinsically. We have to look at what's coming along with them. So from a carbohydrate perspective, there's 4 essential things to human life: essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, essential vitamins, and essential minerals. Bottom line is that from a carbohydrate perspective, and this is math, this is not debatable, because you can take amount of protein, fat, vitamins, and minerals and divide by the total number of calories. The carbohydrate that provide us with the most essential substances are non-starchy vegetables and low-sugar fruits. Starches and sweets are some of the least essential nutrient-dense foods on the planet, so anyone who says you should eat more of what is non-essential for health and less of what is essential for health, I'm not really sure how they got their medical license.
Well, I agree with that, and you can Google the guy's name. The book is called The Starch Solution, and we won't pick on him anymore. We picked on him a lot on this program. So much more I want to talk about. Talk to us a little bit about exercising. People say, "Oh, you got to exercise more if you want to lose weight," and you don't necessarily believe in that, based on your book, the chapter, The 6 Principles of Smarter Exercise. Tell us about smarter exercise as opposed to just plain old exercise.
The reason we're told to exercise more is because we've been led to believe that this is all about calories, and the more you exercise, the more calories you burn. That's true. But exercising obsessively is just like starving yourself. It's just another way of doing it. The key to long-term health and fitness is not starvation, either by eating less or by exercising more. It's by causing hormonal change, which enables your body to heal itself. And the way you do that via exercise is via 2 forms of exercise. One isn't even exercise. It's just being active. It's being a person. It's standing up, walking, taking the stairs. That's not exercise. That's being a human being. We didn't have elevators for a long time, so taking the stairs is just what you're supposed to do. And then there is very short duration, very high intensity, no impact, safe exercise, such as interval training and such as very heavy resistance training. These are the forms of exercise that cause hormonal change, which causes lasting metabolic benefit. And you can't do a lot of them because they're so intense. So
like a 5-10 minute workout kind of thing.
Exactly, and you're not stopping after 10 minutes because you're lazy. You're stopping after 10 minutes because
burnt.
doing 11 minutes is impossible.
Yeah, so you want to max out on your exercise and do it intensely.
Exactly, but also with high safety. This is easy for people to hear this and think, oh, I'm going to take a 300-pound tire and throw it over my head. No. Like, imagine getting on an upright stationary bike, and instead of pedaling for 60 minutes, simply getting warmed up and then cranking the resistance up so high that you have to stand up on the bike like you're pedaling up a hill, doing that as hard as you can. Not fast, but hard, because the resistance is so high for 30 to 60 seconds, taking a 2-minute break and repeating, and in 10 minutes, you're done, and you put no impact on your joint.
That's awesome. That's my kind of workout. 10 minutes a day, 4 days a week, right? So does that sound good? Intense, though.
That's 4 days a week, especially if you're going into weight training, is impossible. So we're talking even 10 to 20 minutes a day, once or twice a week, if you can bring the intensity high enough.
All right, we don't have a lot of time, but we would be remiss if we didn't discuss hormones, especially insulin. Tell us about the role of insulin when it comes to weight loss and weight gain, and what we could do to control or stabilize insulin.
Insulin is heard by your brain as saying you have energy available. It's a signal to your brain that it doesn't need to burn fat because there should be glucose or energy circulating in your bloodstream. So if you just take a person and you feed them no food and you inject them with insulin, their brain will be reticent to burn fat because it thinks food is available. Because insulin says that's what the brain sees insulin as. So when we eat things like starches and sweets that spike our insulin, even if we are in a state of calorie deficit or negative caloric balance. It's very difficult for our body to burn fat. Instead, it will slow down and burn muscle tissue because it perceives insulin as in the bloodstream as saying you have enough food available to you, don't burn body fat.
And so, stabilizing insulin, do you recommend nutritional supplements to work with insulin, or do you recommend just dietary strategies?
Focusing on eating the most nutrient-dense foods in the world, non-starchy vegetables, nutrient-dense protein, whole food fats, and low-fructose fruits will automatically and effortlessly keep your insulin levels in a healthy, sustainable range.
What about the role of high fructose corn syrup when it comes to difficulties losing weight and when it comes to weight gain?
High fructose corn syrup has been shown, fructose in general has been shown in clinical studies to alter the baseline levels of satiety hormones in your body, meaning that if you take a rodent and you just pump them full of fructose versus another form of sugar like glucose, that rat will need to eat more calories to feel the same level of satisfaction in the future. So forget about the fructose ingestion at that time, just like next week. They will need to eat more calories to feel fuller because the fructose has actually caused inflammation in the satiety centers of their brain.
So it raises the set point via inflammation in the brain?
That's exactly right. And there's a lot of foods that do this. For example, MSG does this, trans fats do this, and that's why eating the foods we've described here, these whole nutrient-dense foods, are so important because independent of the calories, these edible products make you fat.
What's your take on supplementation? Do you supplement?
I supplement with supplements that I put in quotations because they're actually closer to whole foods. For example, is fish oil a supplement or is it a food? Is spirulina a supplement or is it a food? Is desiccated beef liver
no,
those?
I'm thinking more like vitamin C, the B complex, basically your essential nutrients more than foods. Although fish oil kind of crosses both lines, I suppose. But I'm thinking more like the basic essential nutrients, essential vitamins, essential minerals, essential fatty acids, that kind of thing.
I think taking a multivitamin, I think taking an insurance policy is a good idea. I think focusing on it as a supplement rather than a replacement is critical, but I do think it's an effective insurance policy.
Now, I notice I'm looking at your pictures and your YouTubes, and you're a pretty thin guy. You're a pretty lean guy. Were you ever overweight?
I wasn't. In fact, I started this journey because I was a naturally thin person, and I wanted to understand. I knew that I wasn't just morally superior. I wasn't trying harder than people other than me. And I said, what is it about my biology that makes me stay slim without really trying? No one's asked that question before. And that's what took me down this path of understanding the neurobiology, gastroenterology, and endocrinology, which underlies obesity. It's not a moral issue. It's a hormonal and neurological and gastrointestinal issue.
So your problem was actually you wanted to gain weight, is that right?
That's exactly right. And it was ironically as difficult for me to gain weight, and this applies to millions of other people around the world. You probably know one of them, and you probably resent them. And the question is, like, how can that be? How can one species, Homo sapiens, have people who have a hard time gaining weight and have people that have a hard time losing weight? It has to be more than just calories at play, and that's what my book looks at.
How would somebody gain weight? We've been talking about losing weight. How would somebody gain weight? Just do everything that people need to do to lose weight in reverse?
That would cause them to gain fat, and it would cause them to become metabolically deranged and diabetic. So the way someone would want to gain weight to an ideal body composition would be through, I would say, an abundance of healthy whole food fats and nutrient-dense protein. So think smoothies, just rich in coconut and cocoa. But it's not easy. I can speak from experience. Trying to eat 6,000 calories per day from whole natural foods is not easy, but at the same time, you don't want to become diabetic. So you have to just listen to your body and focus on taking in more whole food fats and nutrient-dense protein if your goal is to gain healthy weight.
Now, you said cocoa a couple of times. So what's the deal with cocoa? What's your take on that? It seems medicinal more than it is nutritional to me.
Cocoa, as you know, is just extremely high in super powerful antioxidants, which are hard to find anywhere else. Not to mention, it's also the single most craved substance in the world. So what a lot of people find is that their sweet cravings can be addressed by just eating something with cocoa in it.
You don't mean Hershey bars, though. You're not talking about Hershey bars.
No. I'm talking about cocoa, not chocolate. Chocolate is cocoa with a dramatic amount of other stuff put in it. But if you use cocoa as an ingredient in a healthy dessert sweetened with a natural non-caloric sweetener such as stevia, it can really do great things for your health as well as for your mental well-being.
We got to leave it there, Jonathan. Thanks so much. That was a fast-moving hour, buddy. Jonathan Bailor, his book is The Calorie Myth. His website is caloriemythbook.com. He's also got another great book called The Smarter Science of Slim. Thank you so much, Jonathan Bailor. That was a very enlightening hour. Hope we get to talk again soon.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Take care, bro. Have a beautiful day. All right, that was Jonathan Bailor. Thanks so much for listening, folks. Tomorrow we'll continue talking about connective tissue. We'll tell you about the Brazilian blowout, which is a hair treatment that features the amino acid cysteine, as we continue talking about protein and peptides and building strong, vital connective tissue. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening, folks. Have a wonderful, beautiful day. We'll talk to y'all later. Bye for now.